Hey everyone, Stuart here. Just wanted to jump in before we start this week's show, just to let you know about the event I've got coming up on the 29th of March up in Edinburgh. Beautiful city. If you haven't been, I highly recommend. I've got the Talent Equation Live. It's a new experiment in learning, which I've been fortunate enough to be able to put on with the support of the fabulous PE staff at Stuart Melville's College. I'll be joined by some of the guests who've come on the podcast in the past: John Fletcher, Rusty Earnshaw, Sarah Kelleher, Danny Newcomb, and Mark Bennett. We're all going to be there. We're going to be working together, delivering sessions and also getting practical and getting hands-on and giving everybody an opportunity to spend time doing some question and answers and working through the problems that you're facing with your own coaching. So if you are hoping to get some learning, it's really good value, and it promises to be a really, really fantastic day. So I'm hoping to see you there. If you're interested in running even a mini community of learning event, a workshop, or actually putting on a big conference like Talent Equation Live, and you're interested in hosting one, then drop me a line over on the contact pages on the website, and we can start a conversation about that. And I'd really, really like to talk to you about that, because I think getting out there and being able to speak to people and meet people is probably one of the best ways in which we can continue this fantastic movement in coaching and skill acquisition and learning and development, and inspiring young people to have a life in sport. So I look forward to seeing you in Edinburgh if you can. If not, I'll look forward to hearing from you in due course. Anyway, on with this week's show.
Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome to the show Alex Twitchen. Alex, welcome to the Talent Equation.
Thanks, Stuart.
So we've obviously been working on a number of different projects, and I know that you've been working in the coach development space for a long, long time. We've crossed paths. I think the first time I ever met you, you introduced me. It was on a level 4 development program, and you had us all building Lego models.
That's right. Yeah, that was part of the United Kingdom Coaching or Centre for Coaching Excellence. Yeah, a few years ago. I've got a bit of a passion for Lego, I have to say.
Well, Lego seems to be a recurring theme, because on last week's one of the previous podcasts with Sarah Kelleher, she'd just come back from Denmark where she'd done the training on the Lego Serious Play.
Oh, right. Okay.
This whole training methodology around how you can use Lego to create creativity. So obviously you'd done the same thing. You were very proud of your VW camper, I seem to remember.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's that was a project.
I bet it was.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So anyway, as a starting point, great to have you on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I guess it's just starting point really, I suppose, is to give everybody your kind of backstory, your potted history, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. So where do I start? Well, I guess I started coaching when I was a student at university, and I did the FA Prelim Award, as it was then, in my first year, and that was a real eye-opener. I really enjoyed it, and it made me realise not so much how much I didn't know about the game, but how for the past 10, 12 years since I've been playing, that I hadn't really thought about what I was doing. I just played. And so that, as I say, that coaching course was really inspiring in the sense of making me stop, think, reflect, and there's a lot more to this game than what I understand or what I know. And then a good friend of mine, Sharon Dixon, she was a very good football player. She asked me if I'd coach the women's football team. I think she was quite keen to raise standards, develop the team, and take things a little bit more seriously. So I thought, why not? I've done this prelim. I enjoyed it. So for 2 years, I coached the women's team at the university, and that was just really, really, really enjoyable to watch them grow, watch them develop. They're a great bunch of girls. Some of them had never played football before. Some of them had played other sports. I mean, you probably know Jenny Buchan from your time at UK coaching.
Oh, yeah.
So Jenny played hockey on a Wednesday and then played football for us on a Sunday. And we just told Jenny, look, just remember, you haven't got a stick in your hand, and no one's going to blow the whistle when you kick the ball.
As a matter of interest, what position did she play?
Jenny played left wing.
Left wing. That's interesting because so we have something in common. We both coached Jenny. I coached her when she was playing for the England mixed hockey team. She was my absolute rock centre midfielder.
Okay. Well, we used her for a pace. She just basically used to knock the ball past a fullback and just outrun the fullback. But she was great. And then probably at the same time, I was born and brought up in High Wycombe, and I lived fairly close to Bisham Abbey. And a friend of mine put me in touch with the county coaching rep for Bucks and Berks, a guy called Jim Kelman. And Bucks and Berks were a little bit unique in the sense that the county FA didn't really want anything to do with coaching or developing football. They were just interested in governing the game, handing out the fines, handing out the suspensions. So Jim had taken this role on a self-employed basis full time. And he was running sort of holiday courses down at Bisham and after school clubs and so forth. And so I got in contact with Jim and said, look, I live fairly close to Bisham. I'm not really doing much during the summer. Do you need any extra coaches? And he said, yeah, come down. So that's how I kind of met Jim. And just Jim is, again, another inspiration. His enthusiasm, his ideas, his knowledge of the game. It's just a brilliant guy to work with. And so I did that for a couple of summers, and I worked for Jim during the Easter. And then after I sort of finished university, I went to America for a summer, worked for a company called Long Island Soccer Camps. And that was run by Gary Book. Again, very different to Jim, but still inspirational in terms of his approach, the way he saw the game, but more importantly, the way he saw coaching and how we should coach, and our relationships with the children and the players and so forth. And then I came back from America and I started a job as a trainee accountant for one of the big four auditing companies at the time. And I was kind of still playing football. And then after about 6-7 months, 8 months, I thought, this is really, really not for me. I wasn't particularly enjoying being a trainee accountant. And I met up with Jim, and he was manager at Wycombe Wanderers at the time. And I met him for a drink and talking about sort of stuff. And he goes, well, why didn't you come and do what I've done? Set yourself up as a kind of a business, and there's plenty of opportunities. You can run your fun weeks, and, So I thought about that. I thought, well, it sounds quite appealing at the time. Talked to my mum and dad about it. They were like, no. They were like, no, you can't do it. And we sort of came to get a proper job, exactly. Well, that was the kind of compromise. I said, look, I was living at home. I didn't really have any obligations, as it were. I said, let me do it for a year, and if it doesn't work out, I'll look for a proper job. And so that was a kind of the informal agreement with my mum and dad. So I quit my job as an accountant and basically followed the same kind of model that Jim had. Kind of started holiday courses for children based on the FA Fun Weeks and the Soccer Star scheme. And we were fortunate that our regional coach at the time was Robin Russell, and Robin was very supportive. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do this properly and kind of demonstrate to my mum and dad that I can make a go of this, I better kind of look out for some other opportunities. So I started tutoring for the National Coaching Foundation, the kind of workshops. So that was quite good. That got me into the kind of role of being a tutor on those courses. And then I was asked to do some sort of part-time teaching at the local college. And I thought, I can kind of fit that in. I can do that in the morning, go coaching in the afternoon. And I guess over the period of about 18 months, 2 years, things just kind of developed and grew. And eventually I was offered a full-time role at the college. I scaled back some of the coaching a little bit and started a full-time role. And that was interesting because that came about through the college having a contract with the local authority to deliver these new national vocational qualifications. So on a Monday and Tuesday, I was based at High Wycombe Sports Centre at the top of Marlow Hill, right by Junction 4 of the M40. You've probably gone past it many, many times.
I know it well.
And my role there was to literally support the recreation assistants as they were studying for these new NVQs in leisure operations. So I wasn't actually based on the college. I was based at the sports centre. So I did that. And then in the meantime, I thought, right, well, as I'm kind of getting into coaching and so forth, I better try and get my full badge of what is now the A license. So I started working towards that. And that, again, was like my prelim, another really, really good experience. Back in those days, the FA used to run what they called prep courses, which were 2-day courses. They were designed to prepare you for the full badge. They were staffed by the regional coaches at the time. And I probably did 3 of those. And each time, you got some good feedback and you felt a little bit more confident. And then after the 3rd one, I was with a coach called Ted Powell, who was the regional coach for London and the South East, I think, at the time. And Ted said, no, Alex, kind of like, you're ready, get your application in. And so I did the 2 weeks at Lilleshall and got my full badge. Did a master's as well at the same time. So in the space of probably 3 to 4 years, I just did quite a lot of stuff. And then the opportunity at Chichester came along and I applied for that, got that. And I was at Chichester for the best part of 23 years until I moved to the Open University last year. And down in Chichester, I kind of stopped playing at this point in time. And Jim put me in touch with the county coach rep in Sussex, a guy called Dennis Proby. And Dennis soon got me out running prelims and stuff like that. And then when the FA introduced a new generation of courses, I got involved in those. And as you know, it's opportunities come along and, if they seem interesting, you sort of get involved in them. You take the opportunity and see where they take you and see where they lead.
It sounds like the classic sporting career where it's very meandering, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, the last 10 years, I kind of got involved with the UKCCE, and then after that, I was asked to become technical director for the Girls Centre of Excellence down at Brighton. So I kind of did that and got them up and running. And then I always had a hankering for managing a semi-pro team. So I did that for a couple of years, which was an experience. And then got involved with the FA's mentoring scheme. And this last year, I've been coaching down at Portsmouth Academy, which is, I haven't really coached in that kind of environment since I had to do when I converted my full badge to the A license, I had to do a year in what was then known as a Centre of Excellence. So I was fairly fortunate that I knew the head of the Centre of Excellence down at Southampton. And so I did my sort of, the requirement down there. That was probably the best part of 20 years ago. So it's interesting to see how things have moved on and changed. I'm probably spending more time doing admin than I am actually coaching. That's the sum of it. So there you go. Yeah, meandering kind of potted history.
Wow. So lots to pick through there. But a couple of things that are just worth drilling into a little bit is when you were at Chichester, you're obviously at Chichester University.
Yeah.
And leading on coaching degree programs and the like?
When I first went there, I kind of taught on the kind of sociology modules because that's what I'd done my master's in. And I've always kind of been more drawn to the social sciences than the natural sciences. I mean, my first degree is in geography and economics. And I kind of kept the coaching as something that I did outside of my teaching. I coached the university football team, for example. And we did, and then with sort of Terry McMorris created a coaching science degree. And that was sort of very much based in the sports sciences area. But I helped Terry out with a couple of modules on that and helped him sometimes or participated in his research. And then I took a bit of time out when our children were born. So my wife and I, we both went part-time and sort of shared the childcare. And when I came back, there was a project called the Sussex Learning Network, which was funded by HEFCE, the Funding Council. And they were looking to develop or improve pathways into higher education for students from non-traditional backgrounds and non-academic backgrounds, students that had been pursuing vocational qualifications. And sport and leisure was kind of one of the focus areas. And it was through that we got funding to develop our community sports coaching degree, which wasn't a hard scientific approach to coaching. It was more looking at the kind of the pedagogy, the kind of sociology of coaching, development. It was really linking sport development to coaching in that sense. It was more looking at the sort of participation as opposed to performance. And that's how we kind of made a distinction between the coaching science, which would focus more on performance and the underlying kind of science, the physiology, the psychology, the biomechanics, etc. The PE program, which was clearly focused heavily on the pedagogy. And then community sports coaching now kind of filled that space around the link between sport development, participation, and the role of coaches in developing sport in that respect. And that proved quite successful. And then we went through a fairly major academic review, and we introduced the sport development and coaching, which kind of took that initial degree on a stage further. And then a lot of my colleagues were badgering me to start a football degree. And I was like always really reluctant, because I thought it was just too specialized, and I just didn't think the industry was really ready to have a degree in football coaching. So I resisted it for a long time, and I knew that other universities had been developing football related degrees and football coaching related degrees. And then I kind of my thinking evolved a little bit, looking at the way that football was growing and the opportunities to work, both part-time but also full-time in football, particularly with the influx of money into academies through the EPPP. And we had a number of students that had graduated from the coaching science degree that had gone to work in football clubs. You got Ian down at Southampton, for example, and Toby is at Southampton as well. So we kind of developed this football coaching degree, but I was very keen to make sure that it linked coaching to an understanding of performance, that it wasn't, that it was as academically and intellectually as rigorous as we could make it. And so that's what we did, and that's proved to be a very successful program. And that kind of was where I finished at Chichester. And I think for a few years I'd been looking to do something a bit different, something which might challenge me in a slightly different way. And I'd previously been the external advisor at the OU, so I kind of knew Ben and Caroline and the team there. And I'd always been intrigued by that method of teaching, distance learning, online, and the challenges involved in that, and the creativity in terms of writing the material and being able to communicate that to the students when you don't have them there, you don't have them on a campus. So the opportunity came up and I applied, and I was very fortunate. And it's been for me a very rewarding move. I'm really enjoying it. Great bunch to work with, and a very, very different experience in many different ways.
I bet it is. So for people who don't understand the OU, the Open University is a fantastic thing that's been going for years and years and years. Most people in who sort of, I guess, around my age will think of the Open University as men with beards and glasses in brown suits on the TV. Yeah. But as a concept, it's a fantastic kind of initiative, really, that's way before its time, using the concept of distance learning, using, I guess, at the time, TV, because it was pre-internet, as a means by which people can learn skills. And it's as it said, it's open. It's probably worth explaining a bit about it.
Yeah, so it's actually 50 years old this year. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary. Wow. And I think its mission is around open learning and open access, and providing people with the opportunity to pursue higher education when they may not have previously had that opportunity. I don't think it's given people a second chance. It's given them a first chance, as it were. But as I say, where previous circumstances might not have enabled them to pursue a more traditional orthodox route into higher education. So it's really providing that kind of opportunity. And there's a saying that we've moved from being a university of the air to a university of the cloud. So the idea that, like you say, Stuart, in the early days of the OU, through the partnership with the BBC, you would get those programs coming on at 6 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock at night. People men in beards and so forth. Whereas
the thing about it, though, just sorry to interrupt, but the thing about it was amazing. The reason we all know this as kids is there's only 3 channels.
Yeah, that's right.
If you were up at 6 o'clock in the morning, as you were as a kid, quite often it was the only thing on.
Yeah.
So you had this lecture on applied physics.
That's it. Yeah, or things like astrophysics and no, that's right.
Sorry.
But yeah, so. There have been some changes. I mean, the changes in the sort of higher education landscape have impacted the Open University in the same way that they've probably impacted all higher education institutions. But the scale, I mean, there are around about 150,000 students studying an OU course, which makes it the biggest university in the country. And you compare that to where I previously came from, Chichester, we had around about 5,500. I think we've got somewhere in the region of about 2,000 students studying on the sport, fitness and coaching degree. We don't, and now it's entirely online. We don't have the kind of residentials and the face-to-face contact that previously you would have had in the past. So it's a real skill. And as we're known as central academics, so we write the material, we put the modules together, and then the students are taught by our army of associate lecturers who are the ones that kind of engage with the students throughout the duration of a module. So it really is back in last September, when the new group of students started, we asked them to kind of post up a little bit of an introduction on a forum. And it was my first experience of that, and reading through some of the stories and what some of the learners are doing. It's really fascinating. There was one student, they're up in the Outer Hebrides with 4 children. They're a fitness instructor, and now they're studying for an OU degree. Just some really, really interesting and stories that the learners have got in terms of where they've been, what they've done, and why they've made this decision now to study for a degree with the OU.
And it might be worth mentioning, actually, that exciting project coming down the line on looking at the development of an Open University course around coach development. This idea of supporting coaches more readily in their environments, as opposed to going back to what you were saying at the actually something I was listening to earlier on. Actually, I was listening to a lecture by Dave Snowden talking about how, in a lot of cases, we've tended to be quite theoretical and missed the practical element. So the kind of apprenticeship piece, so the blend of the theoretical and the practical, being a coach developer, helping somebody learn as they go and help them make sense of their experiences. So it's probably worth just probably expanding on that a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. So part of the OU's charter is that we have to make a certain amount of our content freely available to the public. That's part of our mission. And so we have this Open Learn platform, and on that platform we have a number of what we call badged open courses. So these tend to be probably consisting of 8 sessions. Each session takes about 3 hours, and they're free of charge. You can access them anywhere, anytime that you like. And they cover a broad range of subject areas. We've currently got 2 that relate to sport that Ben Oakley has written. So one on coaching and psychology, and the other one on sort of communications and working relationships in sport. And, I've always felt that coach developers, whether they be tutors, mentors, whatever terminology we use to describe the people who support the development of coaches, there's been a kind of a lack of material, a lack of support for those kinds of people. And given my background, I mean, I really enjoy the tutoring and the mentoring that I do. So it is a bit of a passion. So I just felt there was an opportunity to write a badged open course that would focus on supporting coach developers. Now, whether you're helping to support a coach in a grassroots participation context or a high performing context, whatever your particular role is as a coach developer, I just kind of thought it would be nice to offer them some support, maybe go beyond what they might get from their governing body. I mean, I go back to when I first started tutoring, or delivering prelim courses. I never got any kind of help or guidance as to what I should be doing as a tutor. The only requirement was that you had your full badge. And there you were. You had 16 learners on a course. Off you go. Yeah. There's a bit of a curriculum. Make of it what you will. It wasn't even a requirement to have any teaching qualification or whatever. It was just kind of made to make of it what you can and get on with it and kind of learn from experience. So that's been a really exciting project. It's made me think, really make me reflect about what coach developers do and the service that they provide and the challenges that they have. And it's kind of been my first introduction to writing for the OU as well. So try to get that across in an accessible manner, so that it engages the people studying the program. Has kind of been a really good challenge.
It's brilliant for me because I think I was the same. Just became somebody who got really passionate about learning and started writing about it and all those sorts of things. And then you get involved in tutoring, because the governing body recognizes that, you get to a certain level as a coach, and then all of a sudden the assumption is that you can teach others, and then you become an educator or you become a tutor or you become a mentor, whatever it is. And you just have to learn as you go through experience. But beyond all that, even if you're not a formal member of the coach education or tutoring workforce, everybody, whether they realize it or not, actually plays some kind of a role in helping others on their learning journey. So I've often found myself in a club environment where people are coming to me for advice or guidance on what should I do in this situation, what should I do in this situation, or I can tell somebody's struggling and they need some help, but they might not realize that they need the help yet. And so it's you don't want to go in there, with your jack boots on saying, right, I can solve this problem for you. Or do you realize that you've got a problem here? Because actually that might actually put them off. So the way you approach that individual to maybe help them to, I guess, raise their awareness of a problem they might be facing or something along those lines has to be sometimes quite, you have to be quite sophisticated. I can't say I've got it right every single time. So I think this is why it's such a timely thing for you to be doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of like the first activity in the first session. What do we mean by being a coach developer? Yes, you can have kind of paid, employed coach developers whose job, whose function, whose role is to help support and develop coaches. But equally, as you say, you might not even think of yourself as a coach developer, but the fact that you might be offering advice or supporting another coach in your club or wherever it might be means that you are supporting the learning and development of that coach. So we kind of want to make it available to anybody who in some way, shape or form is supporting the learning and development of a coach, whether that's kind of, let's say, a more formalized coach developer role, or whether even if you don't realize or recognize that you are a, inverted commas, a coach developer. So that's kind of where it's aimed at.
And I think that's a brilliant thing from my perspective as well, because if we could get to a situation within coaching where more people were equipped to support others in a kind of peer-to-peer way, that would really help those people who begin their coaching journey to not be on their own. You and I probably both have the same experience of you're kind of on your own, kind of trying to work it out for yourself. Things don't necessarily go right. You don't really know why. I mean, nowadays you've got far more opportunity to find that out because there's a wider array of information. But at the time, there wasn't a great deal. So a lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is you trying to reflect. Sometimes you're self-delusional and you don't reflect properly. So actually, sometimes having that second pair of eyes, raising your awareness of certain things, is really useful.
It is. And I kind of reflect back now on my early experiences of coaching and realize just how lucky I was and how fortunate I was to have someone like Jim, who was kind of someone you looked up to, someone who would willingly help you, support you, and get you through those kind of those challenges that you have as a beginner coach, someone with not so much experience. But I agree. It's the more support you can get, and wherever you find that support, the better. It's interesting because we're just doing this project with the FA around the UEFA B, and what we're doing is we've asked the coaches who did the UEFA B course last year to volunteer and support the coaches who are on the UEFA B course this year. So we've called them the vets because they've been through it. They've had the experience and they've come out of it at the other end. And we've had about probably eight or nine that volunteered. And out of that, we've probably got 4 or 5 of last year's group who are quite active in terms of supporting the coaches on the course this year. And that's beginning to generate some really interesting insights into how coaches can be supported. And this is kind of what we're presenting at the Applied Research Conference. It just kind of opens up lots of questions about governing body qualification courses and where they sit in the kind of broader learning landscape and how you join the dots up with other forms of learning and so forth.
Fantastic. So, as much as I'd like to talk about coach development, and I think we will circle back to that as a theme.
Yeah, sure.
I'm also interested. You had a bit of a throwaway line earlier on that I made a note of, which was you said that you decided you wanted to get involved in coaching a semi-professional team, and it was in your words, interesting experience. Well, that piqued my interest. So tell me that story.
So down in Chichester, we got Chichester City. Play in step 5 in the county league, and the ground is literally, I can throw a tennis ball from the AstroTurf at the university onto the pitch. It's literally just across College Lane, and we've always had students that have played for the club, and we've never really made the links. And probably about 8 years ago now, I guess it would have been, the chairman of the club came on a coaching course because he also had some children that played football. So he came on a level 2, and I got to know him. I don't think he was the chairman at the time. I think he was just kind of like getting involved in the club. And then over a period of time, we sort of kept in touch, and then things didn't go so well at the club, and they decided they were going to have a change of manager. And so kind of Ollie asked me if I'd be interested, and I thought, yeah, it's something I've kind of wanted to do. So that was probably Easter time. And then we realised that the club was quite heavily in debt, and Ollie left as chairman. He had other sort of business commitments that kind of required his time. And so I started the season or pre-season with very few players, and no money, no budget, real sort of ragtag operation. And so we kind of built a team out of a combination of former youth team players from the club, because the club had quite a very good youth section. So those that had just sort of graduated from the under-18 team, and then some students from the university. And it was like hand to mouth, and it was just about getting 11 players on the pitch week to week. So there wasn't really much coaching involved, but it was a really good experience in terms of managing players and trying to get the best out of players on a week-to-week basis. And somehow we managed to survive. We sort of stayed up in the first division, and since then the club has got itself back up on its feet. It's now doing well. I'm kind of no longer involved, but hopefully this year they might get promotion into the Isthmian League, the next step up, step 4. But it was a really good experience of how things operate at that level. We had no money. I used to have to go and pick the kit up from a laundrette in Chichester. I used to go down probably on a Thursday lunchtime. It was just the other side of Chichester. And I went in one day, and the lady who ran the laundrette, she stopped me, she said, "Alex." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I've not been paid for the last 6 weeks. Like, it's quite a big bill." I said, She goes, I don't think we can really carry on washing the kit if we don't get it paid. It's just those kind of stuff. So I feel, okay, so where do we find the money to pay the bill from the laundrette? Otherwise, I'd be washing the kit at home, much to my wife's mirth. I mean, that is, it's everyday club football, I suppose. Getting the kit washed is the most important thing that you've got in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, beyond getting the kit washed, it's interesting though how different sports and different contexts and different forms of life, like the concept of getting the kit washed. I mean, I've coached and played. I've coached what would have been. So you talk about the steps, right? So so is step one?
So step one is the conference.
Conference.
Yeah.
Okay.
So step one is the conference, and then step two is conference, South Conference, North. Step three gets into sort of the regional leagues, Premier divisions, and then so you go down to step 7. Step 7 is kind of West Sussex Saturday afternoon park football.
But that's even at step 5. That is still semi-professional in the sense that players are getting paid.
Yeah, certainly it's some of the players in our league. Yeah, I mean, you're never quite sure whether to believe the rumours or not. Could be on 50, 60, 70 pounds a week.
Wow.
For playing step 5 football.
Yeah, a far cry from 50, 60, 70,000 pounds a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But interestingly, so obviously in different sports contexts, obviously coached hockey, coaching a team who was in our national league. So this would be the equivalent of, say, the championship.
Yeah.
Or one below that, let's say. So it would have been, say, Div 2, Div 1, Div 2. You're still the players are still going home with their own kit and washing it themselves and bringing it. It's a totally different world.
Yeah.
But anyway, just going back to that, you mentioned at the start of that you were talking about how you said it wasn't really coaching because it was about managing players. Why did you make that distinction?
Yeah, it's probably a conceptual difference, isn't it, in terms of the way that I see my role as a coach, as opposed to what we might conceptually argue is the role of a manager. I mean, I think you can blur the distinctions between the two, and I think you can kind of flip the argument around because it depends on what you mean by coaching and what you probably mean by being a coach. I didn't feel that. Well, for example, we didn't really train. We didn't really practice.
Oh, right.
The university players were playing on a Wednesday, so they were sort of fairly tired. And so post Christmas, I think we just said, look, we'll just play, and that's it. Get through the games. So I never felt that I was on the training pitch trying to organise and help players develop on the training pitch, as it were. It was right. Here are 11 players. This is who I've got this week. How best can I organise these players for this particular game to try and get this particular outcome? And how can I motivate these players to want to be able to play so that they do turn up? So it was about those skills, which I would argue, they're an integral part of coaching. But I would see them more perhaps moving towards a managing the coaching process aspect, as opposed to the other end of the spectrum in terms of where you're being able to work with the players and help them improve in a more structured practice environment.
So it's interesting because for me it's about the task.
Yeah.
So what defines the coaching role is defined by the kind of the environment you're in and the task. I use obviously a constraints-based kind of ecological framework to consider that. So it's you as an individual and the skills that you have combined with your environment and the task at hand. So for me, if the task at hand defines that your role, your scenario there requires you to, so you're doing less activity in a more formal training context, and therefore you're having to, because you just don't have availability of players, etc., therefore you have to adapt your methodology to suit the circumstances that you're within. In my mind, that is still coaching. It's
probably taking a broader view of coaching, and I agree. It's an interesting one, even when you look in the Premier League, how Premier League clubs approach this kind of issue, isn't it? Because they've all kind of got different conceptual ideas and different structures, and whether you call someone the head coach, whether you call someone the manager, what role do they have? Are they active on the training pitch, or do they kind of delegate that to other people? So I don't think there's a kind of a right solution, as it were.
No.
It kind of comes back to my point about coaching being a mystery, as opposed to a puzzle. Puzzles like jigsaws and crosswords, they have a solution. Right. Yeah, there's a right answer. Whereas mysteries, we can get more and more information, and yet it just kind of makes the problem seem more and more complicated. I always kind of like that distinction.
That's interesting, because I actually, it's a really good analogy, because I feel like with some people feel it is a puzzle, in the sense that there is a right answer.
Yeah.
And actually, once you can disabuse yourself of that notion,
yeah.
I actually think you become a bit more free, because I think a lot of us get quite frustrated that we just can't find the right answer. It's like, I'm so frustrated, why can't I find the right answer?
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, once you know that there isn't a right answer, there's
more comfortable.
Exactly. You can almost sit more comfortably with that, can't you?
Yeah. And I think it's therefore kind of being comfortable with your approach, with how you understand coaching, and not beating yourself up whether what you understand as coaching and being a coach aligns with what other people feel that coaching is and being a coach. As long as you can reconcile it to yourself and justify it to yourself, then I think that kind of gives you a step forward. So I feel over the years I've developed a sense of myself as a coach, my self-identity, and what coaching means to me and what being a coach means to me, and therefore how I see other tasks, if you like, as perhaps being different. And I've kind of reached the point where I'm comfortable with that. I can rationalize it, I can justify it, and I accept that it might not be the same as how someone else sees it, but it's how I see it. And I'm not going to force that on other people, because it's just my identity, who I am. And I think that self-awareness and being aware of who you are and your views and how you interpret things is a really important step for people to make.
So in that notion, I think that's really important. I mean, I'm certainly someone who's accused of forcing my ideas on others, which I'm not, because nobody has to do anything.
Exactly.
It's just a sharing of concepts and ideas. And I can be, I guess, forceful in some of my sharing of those ideas, but that's just because of quite a strong conviction.
A passion.
A passion for an approach that I feel, for me anyway, one of the reasons I am so passionate about it is because I feel it gives, for me, kind of an ideal blend between somewhere I find myself in that sort of talent development type space, I suppose, where you're at the crossroads, the piggy in the middle between participation and development and performance, I suppose. I've always been looking for something that might give me a means by which I can answer both of those masters, if you like. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so committed to that as a kind of an approach. Now, does that therefore mean this approach works in every context? Well, no, I would never say that. I mean, in a super high performance context where you're very, very limited on time, you're very limited by resources, etc., that might require a particular method. I guess the message that I try to send out is that I think for an awful lot of us, we have been either educated or have been provided information which has been dominated by a particular educational paradigm. And I'm trying, I suppose, to open eyes to an alternative and allow people to explore in that space a little bit more.
And I think the responsibility that you have as a coach is to try and constantly improve yourself and develop yourself, so that you therefore do the best for the performers that you're working with, whether they're high performing athletes going for an Olympic medal or whether they're just people that want to come along and play. And I actually really enjoy that diversity, because I kind of work in a talent environment, but equally I do a lot of mentoring in grassroots football clubs. And I kind of I think as a coach, you need to develop a methodology, a method of working. And I personally think the word philosophy gets overused. We constantly talk about what's your coaching philosophy. And, to me, philosophy is about the meaning of life and why are we here and what we're doing and what does it all mean and so forth, those kind of existential questions. So over the years, I've kind of reflected and think, I have what I think is my methodology. And that methodology is flexible. I can adapt it to different contexts as is required. And that kind of serves me quite well. That kind of methodology, it it shapes and influences what I do in terms of designing practices and sessions. It kind of shapes the way I try and build relationships with players and parents and other coaches and so forth. And so it sits there at the core of my coaching self-identity and who I think I am.
And I think that's key, isn't it? Because again, that without getting rooted or dogmatic about it and inflexible, but what you do have then is I describe this a little bit like it's like the roots of a tree. It's kind of what grounds the tree. Now, through the seasons, as it grows and as it, the trunk becomes stronger, it becomes more resilient. It can withstand different environmental conditions. But in terms of how the tree blossoms and how it flourishes in terms of its leaves and how it shapes, that's constantly changing. The shape of the look of the tree, as it moves with the wind and everything else. So I use that analogy quite a bit because what we're saying is that your methodology, i.e. your rationale for your methods or your approaches, is rooted, in a particular, I guess, theoretical. Has a theoretical underpinning, and I think being cognizant of that's really important. But that doesn't stop you then from engaging in a flexible way based on the needs of the participants.
Exactly. It's also interesting that if I describe the way I tend to approach practice, I would say that I can operate over a broad spectrum of practice types. But I'm probably moving far more towards game-like and game-related type practices. So I kind of see myself as a designer of games. That I will try and, when I'm designing a session, I'll try and think about how I can put this into a game-like practice as much as possible. But that actually stems from my early experiences of coaching. And when I was down working with Jim at Bisham, I would sometimes have 24 children, 5 hours a day, for 5 days. And I kind of learned, partly through Jim's influence, that one of the best ways to manage and engage those children was to organize them into little games, 3v3s, 2v2s, 4v4s, and try and create it as realistic as possible, but engage them. And we'd have like lots of little pitches going on and we'd move players around. And I kind of, that's how I evolved my approach to practice. So my approach to practice didn't stem initially from a theoretical basis, whether that's teaching games for understanding or nonlinear pedagogy. It stemmed from, it was rooted in the practical management and organization of looking after anywhere between 16 to 24 children, across a broad ability spectrum for 5 hours a day across the course of a week. And then as I kind of developed, then I became more aware of things like teaching games for understanding and more recently nonlinear pedagogy. So it's kind of each has reinforced the other. Right. And I always, whenever someone says to me that theory informs practice, I'm always fairly quick to go back, but practice also informs theory. That it's not a one-way street. That it's a virtuous kind of circle that we can learn as, our practice can inform our theoretical understanding as much as theoretical understanding can inform practice. And I sometimes think that we present it as a one-way street, that it's all about theory into practice, but we never look back the other way. And kind of where I sit as a coach who's quite active and as a coach developer, but somebody who works in higher education as well, I'm always quite conscious of that.
So for me, I think and this is something that Keith Davids is also very, very passionate about, is the practitioner informing the theorist and vice versa. So that, because I think the practitioner has the questions that the theorist needs to answer in many ways. And the best, for me anyway, I guess certainly for our world, but the best type of sort of scientific approaches are the ones that are rooted in real world problems and trying to solve real world problems. Well, in principle, that is what science is there to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
either theoretically to help us conceptualize the world that we live in and give us a means by which to understand it better, and then in some so purely theoretically, or sometimes going a bit further by kind of conducting experiments which can further confirm some of our theoretical assumptions.
No, and I agree. And I think sometimes I'm torn between seeing things as a practitioner and the questions that I want to ask as a practitioner, and seeing things as someone who kind of, I would never call myself an academic or a professional researcher. I think I would call myself an educator. So I sit right between those two kind of spaces, those two kind of worlds. But I enjoy the kind of thinking or intellectual challenge of working across that space. So one of the kind of issues I kind of keep contemplating at the moment is the distinction between teaching games for understanding and nonlinear pedagogy.
Yeah, okay.
And I accept that they're not two separate things. There's a degree of kind of a degree of commonness between the two. But I sometimes look at my practice and I think, am I kind of like using a nonlinear pedagogy approach here? And sort of, when does that then kind of spill over into more of a teaching games for understanding approach? And is there a difference there, or am I just using different constraints? And it's a really interesting intellectual challenge.
What have you thought about that?
Okay, so this is my thinking. I'm not a specialist in the area of skill acquisition, but this is kind of my thinking, is that it depends upon what I think your primary intention in that practice is. Is it about the development of movement skill, or is it about helping players to understand the game and the decisions that they make in the game? I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate it. Every Saturday we do something called Trachcan challenge, where literally I bought a dustbin from Argos, $11.99. Other dustbins are available from good stores. And I've got about 15 variations now of Trachcan challenge. So the basic idea is you put the trash can down, and the players in some way, shape or form have got to get the ball into the trash can. Or sometimes I turn the trash can on its side, the dustbin on its head. We put a cone on top, we put a ball on top, and whatever. A couple of examples. I might put the dustbin close to the fence, probably about a meter away from the fence, and I put my kit bag into it to weigh it down. The players are probably 10, 15 meters away, and the task is just to get the ball into the trash can, either directly or can they get in off the fence. Another one we do, which they quite like, is I put a couple of holes in the dustbin, and I use a camping strap and hang it from the crossbar. And again, the task is, can you get it into the dustbin? Now, for me, that's about the development of movement skill, but in a sort of quite highly randomized way. They're not in lines. They're not taking it, one at a time. Just get a ball, have as many goes as you can. Go on, just keep going. Got 10 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. Because the primary intention is to try to get them to think about the movement skill and the technique, and be consciously aware of how much force they need to get onto the ball, the shape of their foot, where they're making contact, and so forth. So I would kind of call that a non-linear approach in terms of the relationship between individual environment and task.
Yeah.
And the constraint. And the dustbin is, I guess you might say, the affordance.
Yeah.
It's the invitation to action.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one thing which I do. The other one that I quite like doing with the players is, and I've not come up with this name, the players have come up with this name, is Tot Football. I can't remember who actually coined the term Tot Football. It was one of them, but they keep asking me, Alex, can we play Tot Football? So what I do is I have a reaction ball, a 3-sided reaction ball, and we literally just have a game, 5v5, 6v6. We might put the goalkeepers in, we might put a target player in, but it's just a game. And of course, this ball is completely unpredictable. It's bouncing, it's moving, it's changing direction. I used to do it when I was coaching the university team, but we did it with a rugby ball. So I've progressed from a rugby ball to a reaction ball. And I don't say anything, I just let them play. But I find it fascinating to see how their bodies are adapting and reacting to the movement of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of rationalized that in terms of the way it's disrupting their kind of motor control program, because this ball is not moving in a predictable way to which they're used to. So they're having to adjust and adapt their body schema, if you like, to the unpredictability of the ball. So it's, I think, helping them to develop their movement skill.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's in a games-based environment, but the primary intention there is not necessarily to develop decision-making in terms of an understanding of what they're doing in this particular moment of the game. It's more about movement skill. And then I might move into a game where the constraints are about, right, we've got the ball here. What do we do? Do we try and play forward, or do we need to keep it, retain? What's the decision? So less about movement skill, more about understanding. Yeah. And that's where I think I'm kind of perhaps moving more into the teaching games for understanding approach as opposed to an inner pedagogy. But it's not a hard distinction. There's almost like a porous connection between the two. And what underpins it for me, and this is my thinking, is the primary intention of what you're trying to achieve in that practice. And I accept that even though when I create a game where I'm focusing on decision making and applying our playing strategy and getting them to think about what they're doing, they're still developing their movement skill. But that's secondary to the decision making. Whereas in Tot Football, the primary intention is the movement skill because of the task and the reaction ball. But I accept they're still going to be making decisions about whether to run, pass, shoot, dribble, or whatever. And you've still got all the affordances in there that bring about that kind of action. So through the reading I do and listening to people like Keith and other people working in the area and so forth, that's now how I try and rationalize it as a practitioner and link it to my practice and what I'm trying to do and how I think about it. And there's just a couple of examples of, that kind of theory to practice and practice to theory relationship.
So in the example you give of Tot Football, if your intent is movement skill, then for example you've used the example of using the reaction ball as a means by which to improve movement skill, and I'm assuming that is their movement skill at ball manipulation and ball control.
Ball manipulation, passing it, shooting, whatever. Running with it. That
could be done by playing on an uneven surface, for example. Which is
exactly.
Route. And then you're saying that if your intent was more focused on, for example, a more, say, tactical appreciation, as in an understanding of use of space or how a group can cohesively work together to deny space to an opponent or whatever it might be, then that's when you might remove the variability of the unpredictability of the ball or keep it, but you might remove it because you want the emphasis to now be placed more on the tactical appreciation side. And that's what you were describing as becoming. And so what you're saying is, so from a method perspective, in terms of approaches and methodological grounding, you're trying to say that you're now trying to develop the movement skill from within that games-based context and less sort of removed from the games-based context. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think what I'm trying to say is it's what kind of environment do you create given the intention of the outcome you want from that particular practice? What's the primary intention? And so is it around the tactical understanding of the game, and therefore how does that determine the kind of constraints that you use and the realism of those constraints in terms of the game? Are they appropriate, or is your primary intention to help the players develop the kind of body schema, the motor control programs which influence their movement without necessarily making conscious decisions about what they're doing? And I think it's the craft of the coach is being able to understand how you design practices which reflect the outcome that you want and where that outcome sits and how you kind of root that in a kind of theoretical tradition. I'm not saying I've got the answers, definitely not, but it's kind of how I've evolved my thinking and why I think, right, okay, how can I justify what I'm doing here? How can I rationalize it? Yeah. I'm not just doing it for the sake of doing it. I want to have some kind of body of theory, body of evidence behind what I'm doing. Yeah. So if someone comes to me and says, Alex, what are you doing here? Well, I'm trying to work on how we get through a deep lying block. Yeah. And this is how I've kind of set up the practice, and here are the constraints and so forth. But the intention here is to get the players understanding, how do you get through a team that are going to sit deep, get lots of bodies behind the ball? How do we break that down? How do we do that? Whereas if this is about developing running with the ball, the ability to dribble, protect the ball in tight areas, right? Here's the game, here's the practice. This is how it's helping a player to protect the ball, use their body, develop their kind of their movement to do that.
See, it's what's really interesting is the principles here. So I don't see TGFU as necessarily. I think your point about it being porous is an interesting analogy. Yeah. I would say it's porous, but in the sense of I think it's nested inside a nonlinear pedagogy. I see nonlinear pedagogy as a methodology that it can embrace TGFU, game sense, these sorts of ideas. Now, there are, like you've quite brilliantly explained with the concept of Jelly Tot Football, there are some distinctions, and I think you should be aware of when you're operating in a context. And this intentionality piece is so important. Keith talks about this a lot. He says a lot of people are over-constraining or under-constraining because they're not clear on the intent. Yeah. And so, for example, if your goal is movement skill, for example, and let's say in your case with the unpredictable ball, it is about movement skill in control, then you could do that in that with the levels of variability that come about through other opponents trying to deny you the ball and reduce space and etc. You could do that. You could equally, in a non-linear approach, you could equally remove some of those variables and allow people more time and space in order to be able to affect that movement skill. The question then is this concept of representative task design, and how representative does it need to be able to allow the performer to still learn the skill without being overloaded with information that means they can't and they literally are just coping, versus removing too much variability and therefore we no longer got a representative task.
Yeah, and I think for me this is one of the biggest issues we have, certainly in my sport, the representativeness or the appropriateness of the constraints that being used. Yeah. Now I know we've kind of talked about over constraining and under constraining. For me it's more about what is the appropriate constraint, and does it keep the practice realistic to the real game. I'll give you an example. I've seen on a few courses now, people set up a game, they've got two channels out wide, two players in the channel, and the constraint is that before you can score a goal, the players in the outside channel have got to touch the ball, or they've got to receive the ball. Okay? And so what you get a game going, might be a 4v4, 5v5, you've got these two players in the outside, someone wins the ball, they're now clear, they're on a 1v1 with the goalkeeper, I can't score because the ball's got to go to the wide player, because that's the constraint. That wouldn't happen in a game, would it?
No.
If you were one-on-one with a goalkeeper, you go around the goalkeeper and put it in the back of the net.
Yeah.
So you say, well, what? That's not an appropriate constraint.
No.
Because it deviates from the realism of the game and the players don't learn. You know, I don't want my player in a game to be clear of the defence and then decide, I'm going to pass to the winger.
Yeah.
And so forth. And the other one that annoys me is when the coach says, right, everyone's on two touch.
Yeah.
Why? Sometimes you need more than two touches.
Yeah.
Surely it's about having the appropriate touches in the appropriate situation for that particular period of time. Yeah. Why put a blanket two touch on everyone? What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And
the answer to that people often give is, I want people to have a better awareness of their teammates in order to constrain them so that they're forced to pass, and therefore look at other people in order to be able to pass. But my view is I still think you can achieve that without only 2 touches.
But also my point would go further, that if I'm in a situation where I can stay on the ball, that gives my teammates more time to move into positions where I can then better pass them the ball.
Exactly.
And it makes it more realistic, because that's what would happen in a game.
Absolutely.
Whereas if I've got to get rid of the ball after my first touch, I might be passing it to someone who's not quite in a good enough position, because we've not quite given them the time to get into a better angle of support, which they would do if that was in a game situation.
Yeah.
So I sometimes wonder about this, and I think in order to design good games with appropriate constraints, you really have to know the game in a lot of depth and a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
And that partly comes with experience. And I've kind of been toying with this idea that maybe we should flip your traditional coaching courses on their head. Because in my experiences, most coaching courses across most sports start with technique, and they kind of like move to the game as you go up from level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And why don't we at level 1, or whatever you want to call it, introductory coaching award, why don't we start with the game, the proper game, and look at the proper game?
Yeah.
And it's almost as like when you get to, the higher levels, that's when you're really diving into the technique and the mechanisms and the real nitty gritty technical detail of what understands that. I go around and I watch, we do these in situ visits with the level 2. And I agree, we're trying to get coaches to design games and make a lot of their coaching around games-based learning. So you go out and watch these coaches working with their players. And quite often, it just ends up being a game.
Yeah.
And the coach is standing there, maybe sort of saying something, a bit of praise or a bit of instruction. And you think, actually, they're just playing a game. The coach is really just facilitating. And I wonder if it's because the coach doesn't have the depth of knowledge about the game to be able to think about how to design the constraints which bring about the learning.
Absolutely.
I've been fortunate enough over the last few years that a former student of ours, he came over to us. He actually played for me when I was manager at Chichester. He came over from Barcelona on the Erasmus program. And he's now gone back to Barcelona. He's finished his degree and he's working for Barcelona. He's working in FCB Escola, the School of Barcelona, which is a bit like their foundation. They have camps all around the world and so forth. So for the last 4 years, I've been going out to Barcelona, and we get one of the lecturers at the university in Barcelona to come and talk. We take the students with us, comes to talk to us about their approach to coaching. Mm-hmm. And they start with the 11v11 game.
Right.
The videos they show us are of an 11v11 game. That's their sort of basic level of coaching. But what they look at is the action of the player who receives the ball, the first action. And then they just kind of build it up from there until the most experienced coaches will be expected to understand not just the action of the first player, but the action of all the players on the pitch and how that all kind of links together. But it's straight away, let's understand the 11v11 game, and then you can scale it back to 9v9, 7v7, 5v5.
You've just hit on one of my. I was smiling broadly when you said, "Let's flip traditional coaching courses on their head." We have a linear coach education system that is technique led. It's still based on the sporter's techniques model. Yeah. And I'm such a fervent believer in, the non-linear approach. And the reason I'm such a fervent believer, and I say belief sounds terrible, but the reason I'm such an advocate, let's say, is because I fundamentally feel that there's people out there, kids particularly, who and I have this on the coaching course I do all the time, where we advocate a games-based approach, right? For novice coaches, engaging games for children is one of the first things we do, and we go out there and we explain to them, and they're very readily happy to take it on board. But I always, usually by ex-players, get somebody saying, but if they don't know the techniques of the game, they can't play the game. And I always say, are you sure?
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is that what we do is by focusing on technique and the emphasis being based on technique, we lose sight of the fact that what I think children should be learning about the sport that they're involved in is what is an appreciation of what are the things that this game asks me to do? What are the things I've got to work on as an individual and as a group, we and me? What have I got to be able to do to achieve this game? And it is a puzzle because there is a solution. And so what have I got to do and they'll begin the process of discovering that and actually being constrained by not having technical solutions.
Yeah.
They begin to start to work it out. And what's interesting is, in terms of the team element, the cohesion stuff, I think when you give kids techniques, that's all they're interested in, doing those techniques. Yeah. When you, if they haven't got them, then they have to play a match. Then they have to work together to try and solve. So they're forced to have a better appreciation of how they can collectively succeed, given the technical limitations that they have. And this could be confirmation bias. I've said this before, but I genuinely watch a group of individuals who have technical limitations in comparison to their peers in other teams, but I watch them navigating together a means by which to try and bring about success. Now, they're not successful. In fact, more often than not, they're not successful. Yeah. But what's interesting is you can see the intent. So it's I don't know how to solve this problem with a technique, but my mate might help me. Yeah. And that's that connectivity that I think is so powerful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, when I go around supporting some of the coaches in grassroots football, one of my favourite practices, which works quite well, but it also works well in terms of illustrating the approach to the coaches. Is I'll get 3 players, so you've now got 2v1, so it's a 2v1 kind of game. I'll put a ball on top of the cone. What I'll do is I'll use some of the flat discs just to make an exclusion zone, so the player can't literally stand over the top of the ball. And then I'll put 2 goals opposite that. Right, you two, you've got to knock that ball off the cone. Okay. Now the one player, they've got to defend the ball on the cone, but if they win it, they can now dribble out through either gate. So you now almost get 2 responses from the child. One, they'll go and stand next to the ball. Right. Now the 2 of you, what do you do now? You've got all that space in front of you that you can use until you get to the point where the other child is standing right in front of the ball. So how are you going to pass or dribble to get around this player, get around the back of them and knock the ball off the cone? Or the other child comes steaming out and tries to win the ball and get a goal. Now where's the space? In behind. If you can get it in behind that one player, you've now basically got a free run to get the ball off. So I use that as a way of illustrating to the coaches how you can kind of manipulate practice design to bring about the development of technique, because you've got passing, you've got dribbling, you've got control, but you've also got the decision making in terms of how do they work together to get past this one defender. But what does this one defender do when they win the ball back? Now can you win it back? Which way is that player who's just recovered the ball? Are they going to go out through that gate, or are they going to go out through that gate?
And
it could be as straightforward as that.
But it's about, like you say, so the element of the game or the techniques in the game that you're trying to emphasize, and you're designing the practice, and you could probably tweak that even further, couldn't you, and add different elements and rules in that might focus you in on the technical bit more, or focus you on the tactical game
appreciation of it
more. And that's where I describe it, it's a little bit like alchemy, I suppose, but it's a bit like you're sort of sprinkling seasoning onto the dish using constraints to create different flavors.
So I've done it in the past. In my kit bag I've got some size 0 footballs,
right?
I've got some tennis balls,
right?
So I've done that practice with a group, and there were 3 quite able players. So I said, look, give me a football, and I gave them a size 0 football. So now the constraint was slightly different because they've got a size, one of these small size 0 footballs than a normal size ball. But I just did it with that 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how you extend it.
I do think that it's interesting, isn't it? I do think there is quite a lack of imagination. I mean, your point earlier, by the way, of, I'm always mindful of this. I've said this several times on the podcast, but it's a quote that keeps coming up, which is, one of the originators of the Teaching Games for Understanding, Rod Thorpe.
Yeah.
When he said to me, "Kids doing games is better than kids doing drills, but it's not much better." And I do think as the shift away from, and I think there is a genuine move away from this conceptualization of children's sport being about, the concept of the drill or the line drill or the technique led drill. I mean, it's not completely gone away, but there is definitely some people. But I think the danger is that what we've not got is a lot of kids playing games.
Yeah.
Again, that's okay, because at least
they're playing, they're engaged.
Engagement. Yeah. But what might not be okay is the fact that that we're missing out on an opportunity to enrich that game, so that not only is it a game that's brilliantly engaging, and even potentially more engaging than the standard formulaic game, but it's a game that then is rich in learning possibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, then you've got this kind of proper best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah. I think we're making progress. Or my experience of going around and supporting coaches in grassroots football, I'm seeing less and less of children dribbling through cones.
Yeah.
I am seeing more games-based practice. I think we're making progress. We're making progress. The bit where I would like us to make more progress is the creativity and the imagination behind those games.
Totally.
So they're not just about playing games. There are these kind of appropriate constraints which shape the environment to bring out even more learning.
Yeah.
But I've come back to the point about coaches really have to understand the game before they can bring out that creativity and that imagination. I mean, it's just, I kind of deliver the level 1 courses, and it's great that on the level 1 courses now we've got principles of play in there. And we get supplied with all these videos from the FA. They're all about 11v11 games. They're all examples of 11v11. So you can illustrate the principles through the videos. And what I've started to do, I'll probably get shot for this, but we've gone out onto the pitch, and I've done like an 11v11 game. Well, not quite 11v11. It might be sort of 11 versus 8 or something like that. And it's almost become walking football. But the intention is to say, right, look, let's go and put into practice what we've just seen in the classroom in terms of the principles of the play. But let's do it in an 11v11 environment. Let's do it on the full pitch. Even if you've got to jog through it. And let me just spend a little bit of time moving you around so you can see the pictures that you're seeing in a full game. Great. And they really, really enjoy that. Now the task is now scale that back to your own environment. Is that 7v7, 5v5, 9v9, whatever it is. And I've just found quite a positive response from people on the courses when we've done that. That we've had some great debates about, well, would you move that player inside to create a space outside that player? Yeah, why not? But you can do that in 9v9, 7v7. And maybe if you zone off your area and create 3 horizontal spaces, you can put constraints about who can go into that wide space or whatever. Yeah. But you can only get to that point if they've got that knowledge of the game. Yeah.
And it's fascinating, so I do something similar where we talk about, kind of what is the game? What are the problems that the game presents? Right? And at the most basic level, it actually can be relatively simple, but it is fascinating how complex people make it. And the things that they come out with, and I'm like, I'll quite often go, yeah, no, you're 100% right. But, with even bringing it more down to its basic level, and it usually boils down to around about 8 things, usually, broadly. And obviously there are dimensions within any of those things, and they become almost an infinite array of dimensions that come in those things. But broadly, that's the starting point. This is the element of the game that and what's great about that is once you start from there, you can go, right, so if we're going to experience this element of the game, this is the thing that we're going to look at. Now we can go a layer below, right? So what aspects of that thing? So let's say, for example, it was about closing space down in a defensive concept, right? Reducing the available space for an opponent. So if that's our idea, then we go, right, okay, so what aspects of reducing space are we looking at? Is it about how an individual reduces space? Is it about how a collective reduces space? Is it about how units reduce space? Where on the pitch are they reducing space? So then you can really drill into that.
Yeah.
And then now all of a sudden you've got a really you've almost got this great kind of, it's probably the wrong word, but it's almost like a casserole. But from there you can go, right, now what do we do now to this casserole, if you like, to really make it taste brilliant? What is it that we're going to add in from herbs perspective? I'll use a cooking analogy all the time.
Yeah, that's quite popular.
How are we going to season it, etc. But it's almost like, and the constraints for me, and whether those constraints are equipment constraints or spatial constraints or task constraints or
whatever
constraints on the individual per people. I just use step all the time. It's just dead simple. And if you use, and they're the ways in which that you can then really enrich that casserole, because what you've done is you've got all the core components in there, haven't you? You've got the fundamental elements, you've got your pot, you've got all those sorts of bits and pieces. That for me is that's when it becomes really magical, because what's brilliant about that is there are times, don't get me wrong, I mean, I don't think anybody's got all the answers here, but there are times when I'm going, I don't quite know, I reckon it needs a bit of this. And I put it in there and I'll go, and I'm almost like tasting all the time. I'm going, nah, it's not quite right. I'm either taking it out and I'm putting something else in, or I'm going, no, I add this as well. Right, now we're getting it. And then I come away from that going, that's logged. That's logged now. That's like in the kind of recipe book, so to speak. It's not a recipe because we're not following it, but it's like saying, oh yeah, that combination's worked well. It's brought about the kind of flavor I was looking for.
No, I agree. And I think that's part of the craft of being a coach, isn't it? Being able to experiment and learn and adapt. And I probably run through a practice 2 or 3 times and keep tweaking it, refining it until I kind of get to the point where it's doing what I want it to do.
Not often you get it right first time. I've found in my experience.
No, exactly. You need to work on it. Have you got the space quite right? Is it too big? Is it too small? Are players doing things that you didn't anticipate or expect that players would do, because they will? So how do you kind of adjust that? No, I agree. And I think it's when you see the development in the player's performance as a consequence of that it becomes really rewarding. That doesn't happen all the time, but there are times when you see that, and it's just that's always the pleasing side of being a coach, is when you can see something happen as a consequence of the way you've kind of guided, helped, worked with the players and so forth.
Fascinating stuff, isn't it? I mean, I think one thing that I find so rewarding about the process, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's people out there who are just literally throwing constraints at stuff, kind of almost mindlessly, because they think it's like, that's the cool thing to do. Now, and you know what? That's not a bad thing, right? Because I still think there's learning going to be coming from that. I think we've all been in that stage of that kind of genuinely unknown thing of, right, I'm going to do this. I don't quite know how it's going to work, and it's a bit scary. And then it's like, and I don't mind that, right? Because as long as you're mindful in the process of doing it, and you're constantly looking and tuning and tweaking and being very attuned to what's happening, I think that's fine. What I don't like is when people just throw a constraint at something and kind of leave it at that, and then sort of sit back and go, well, look, there's learning happening over there. Look, you can see it, can't you? That's the emperor's new clothes stuff. There's a very important but very, very subtle difference in those two things.
That's where you need people that you can turn to and can help you.
Sense makers, exactly.
And that's why we need more people. It goes back to the point where we started, isn't it, about coach developers? You might not think of yourself as a coach developer. If you're working alongside a friend of yours in a whatever kind of environment it is, and you can bounce ideas off of each other, and you have that confidence and that trust in that relationship to be able to do that, that's going to make progress. If you're just that single coach working by themselves, you haven't got that person who can, as you say, help you to make sense or even reframe the problem that you've got.
That's right.
And we do need, I think, more people working together on a peer-to-peer basis, supporting each other in order to help them progress, rather than just relying on a traditional model that you go on a course and that's it, off you go, get on with it yourself. I know, I look back now, and my initial experiences as a young coach in terms of the support I got were absolutely invaluable. And then when I was down at Chichester, we had a really good group of friends. We were all involved in football in sort of various ways. And just the amount of learning and the stimulus and the development that I got from those people was immense. I don't think I would be here now thinking the way that I'm thinking without being able to have that kind of group around me. We were like a little community of practice. We call ourselves a breakfast club because every so often we go for breakfast and just chew over the fat, so to speak. But it's the coffee. It's the conversations over coffee, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're sometimes the most important conversations that you have.
Yeah. And
they're the ones that make you think and reflect. And I'm sure they happen. I think the challenge is how do we connect up the different forms of learning so they support each other as opposed to being distinct from each other.
Yeah.
Informal learning is over here, formal learning's here. It's about making the connections between the two so they complement each other rather than being separate and independent of each other. And I think that's the challenge for governing bodies, particularly in this day and age where you've got so much information available at the click of a button.
Yeah,
and
that's a really important point, because I think for a long time we've just considered the formal learning as enough. As the end in itself, you have the knowledge, you've been on training, and the assumption thereafter is that's going to now translate into practice.
Yeah,
because you're qualified, you're done, job done, and I think that for me is a very, very flawed model that, fortunately, we're moving away from. But that's another podcast.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is, and I it goes back to when I did my full badge. I never saw the course at Lillishall, the 2 weeks, as an opportunity to learn.
Right.
It was an assessment process,
right.
And the reason for that was after I did my third prep course, Ted Powell, who I had a huge amount of respect for. I finished my practice, went over to see Ted. He gave me my sheet. He said, "Well done, get your application in." But then he said, "But just remember, treat it as like it's a practical examination. It's a 2-week assessment process.
Right. This
is where you've learned. That is the assessment bit at the end."
Wow.
And that's going back more than 20 years ago. So I've always kind of felt that the course in itself doesn't constitute the whole learning. There's a bigger learning landscape around that formal course, and it's just how we position it and the expectations we have. I always say to coaches coming on the courses I deliver, this probably won't transform your coaching.
Yeah.
But it might just nudge you in a direction or a little bit along the way.
Yeah.
And you've got to make sense of this when you go back out into your real world. Don't expect that I'm just going to suddenly overnight turn you into a better coach, because I'm not.
Do you know what, though? Even if people understood that would be better, in the sense of if you just turned those courses, for however long they are, into confirmation of learning, weeks, whereby you're basically allowing people to sit with their lived experiences away from the course, help them to make sense of it, help them to shape that into some sort of coherent approach or methodology, and then send them off with a kind of, I guess, an action plan of new forms of knowledge and new areas for them to explore in terms of their practice until next time. That would be okay. That would fit for me. But because there's this idea, I mean, the amount of conversations I've had over the years in, kind of governing body contexts around the content that we need to convey on the course and the available time to deliver that content, and there's a lot to do, and blimey, and no, we can't do too much of that because that would take up too much time, and we've only got them for 2.5 days. We won't have them for more than 2.5 days. I just think now I look back at that, I think to myself, that is such a ridiculous way to conceive of a learning approach.
Yeah, it's kind of like, could you ever get to a point where you had an open box curriculum? In other words, a course was an open box, and as the coach, you just filled it with whatever content that you wanted.
Yeah.
And you might go and curate that content from the web.
Yeah.
But you don't know whether that information is any good or not. So you need someone then who's going to tell you or interpret and say, well, yeah, I'm not so sure that that's a very good interpretation or representation of this. You maybe want to think about this.
I think that's the direction we've got to go in, because if you think about, if we take a non-linear approach to coach development in the same way, and you say you got to move in that respect, because let's take when you were coaching that that non-league
team.
Your form of life there, you had problems that you could not solve. And the level of support you needed was purely defined by the environment and the task at hand. And if you'd had an open box curriculum where you had somebody helping you to sort of maybe even just to signpost you to relevant information, or even just to sit with you so that you can at least explore those challenges and kind of co-create or even create your own solutions to that, then that's you're filling your own box.
And if you think about it now, you think about the technologies that are available to help you do that. I mean, I've done a little experiment with my phone. I've just asked Siri, can you tell me what nonlinear pedagogy is? And it comes back with just hundreds and hundreds of resources from the web. But when you follow that up with a question, it's like, do you think I should be using it with my players? It comes back and says, that's a question I can't help you with. So you can gather the information, but it won't interpret it. And that's where you need the kind of the human interaction.
So we're a long way away from artificial intelligence.
I think so.
Replacing us.
Exactly. It's
only a matter of time, though.
Who knows?
Machine learning.
Your next coach developer might be called Siri, or your next coach developer might be an algorithm.
It's a good. That's an interesting jumping off point. So I've got to that point where I'm now going to have to dash out to attend a meeting because the day job calls. But Alex, I've really, really appreciated the conversation.
That's okay. It's been a pleasure.
And I've just loved. I mean, the time's flown as it often does. I feel like I've just been in a jam session, just talking about our experiences, which is fantastic. If people want to track you down, how do they go about doing so?
I'm on Twitter, but I don't tweet that. I tend to retweet. So it's at Intelligent Coaching. Intelligent Coaching. Yeah, you'll be able to find me on Twitter. That's probably the best.
I'll put the link
medium.
in the show notes. Yeah.
Or alex.twitchen at open.ac.uk. That's like the work email.
I imagine there might be quite a bit of interest in the badged online course.
Yeah.
It's not due to land until later in the year, but it'd be interesting. Just I guess some people might have some questions about it, which might be useful for you in terms of shaping it. So
it's still kind of like still in the sort of draft stage. We got time to sort of shape it before we have to finally hand it over and it gets built into the website.
Brilliant.
That's good.
Alex, appreciate your time.
No problems. Thanks, Stuart. Catch up soon. Cheers then. Bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. What a great chat that was with Alex. Fascinating, just reading about his journey. I love that quote at the start. Let me be a coach for a year, and if it doesn't work out, I'll get a proper job. Very similar to my journey, where I got caught on the hockey pitch for the 15th time, and my A-level art teacher said to me, "You ought to have a career in sport, son." Very good advice. I do love some of the themes that emerge from this idea that, theory informs practice, but practice also informs theory. Been a big advocate of that for some time. I love that suggestion as well around coach development about the open box curriculum, allowing people to kind of fill the box themselves. As some really resonant things that are kind of reconnecting with me there. And if you don't take anything else away, you've got the Trachcan challenge and jelly Tot Football. So we're all good as far as that's concerned. Hope you enjoyed. As always, there's some spaces available on the conclave if people want to join, and also a few people have started reaching out to me to to talk to them about coming over and doing some workshops and speaking at a few conferences. The diary's getting booked up pretty fast, and I only have a few windows to be able to do something like that. But if you are interested, it's probably worth getting hold of me now in the early part of the year so that we can get something in the diary. Head over to the web page, or you can hook me up on Twitter, and we can get a conversation going, and hopefully I can come and work with you and some of your esteemed colleagues on your journey of learning. In the meantime, have a great week of coaching, and remember, ditch those drills.